Hello friends, let's talk about our feelings. Okay, so this is something that I've danced around for quite a bit now, but let's address it head on. What the heck? So we know that when someone is escalated, the script that is in play is not one that's conducive to a rational, logical conversation, in large part because feelings don't care about your facts. You cannot logic someone out of a situation that they did not logic themselves into, as is the case with someone who is escalated. The primary emotions that we see in an escalated situation are fear, anger, sadness. These can be reactions to all sorts of circumstances, a lot of times uncertainty, disempowerment, and persecution. And since in de-escalation perception is reality, these circumstances don't even have to be factual in order to affect behavior. So an escalating situation has a situation which prompts an emotion, which prompts a behavior, which changes the situation. As things escalate, the situation becomes more unstable, which prompts stronger emotions, which prompts more violent behaviors. So there's two important things about this cycle of escalation that we need to understand. First, the only thing we can affect here is the situation. The rest is in the hands of the escalated person. And second, this circle can be used to de-escalate as well as to escalate. Every single de-escalation attempt involves engaging with some part of this cycle. Now, sometimes people try to engage with the emotion, and that's not a bad strategy at low levels of escalation, which is going to be most of the time. When we use plain language to identify the emotion that we believe to be driving this escalation, and someone is not escalated past all reason, then that can be a great jumping off point for helping them to modify their behavior by removing the influence of the circumstances that their behavior has created. Sometimes, though, this strategy can backfire, especially around emotions that aren't perceived to be socially acceptable by the person experiencing them. Fear is a good example. Lots of people perceive fear as weakness, and weakness as failure. So if I suspect that fear is the driving emotion, and I call out that emotion, then he, and in my anecdotal experience, it is always a he, may very well escalate further by going on the defensive, and instead of acknowledging that emotion, deny it. Funnily enough, when someone goes on the defensive, their driving emotion becomes anger, so in a way it's self-fulfilling, but it damages my rapport, and that's not great. So I try not to call out fear, even if I think that that's a big part of the problem, instead going with something like, that sounds really frustrating. Frustration isn't an emotion, but that's a semantic distinction that is not important in the moment, and it lets us move on in a productive way. Moving on to the next portion of the cycle, behavior. We cannot affect someone else's behavior. This is tied to the illusion of control, which I've mentioned before and will do an episode on one day. No, seriously, the whole idea that you can control another person is utterly ridiculous. They have autonomy no matter how much power you have over them. The prison system is designed to have as much control over human beings as is possible, and there are still recurring instances of the very behaviors that the system is designed to prevent, including the continuation of the behaviors that ostensibly got them into that prison in the first place. Your workplace, no matter how dystopian it is, still does not control you. You make a value judgment that the behaviors that they would like to see are worth it to you in some way, perhaps because your landlord has a huge amount of power over you and because food exists and is important. Parents also have no ability to control their children, and the more they try, the more they fail, either creating defiance where it didn't need to be or damaging the people as human beings as though that were a fair trade to maintain the illusion of control. If control over human beings were possible, the world would be a very different, very boring place, and the continued. And finally, the situation. This is the area where we can have the greatest effect on someone else's behavior. Since we cannot directly affect someone's behavior, we have to try to do it indirectly by changing the circumstances in which they are behaving. One of the most important ways we can do this is by making ourselves out to be a trustworthy and compassionate person, because we are part of their circumstances. Because yes, I can remove distractions and lower stimulation and put together a show of force and outline options and consequences, but if I'm not on their side, if I don't care about them, if I can't get on board with their goals, if I'm not demonstrating compassion, then I'm only going halfway. If you are scoffing right now, then I want you to imagine that you are mad at Mr. Rogers. Go ahead. Try. Compassion and her big brother empathy are our greatest allies in de-escalation. The ability to look at someone else's situation and consider how they might be you, might have been you, or were you at some point is the foundation for the rapport that we need to be building when we de-escalate. They have to get down on their own, but we can stabilize the ladder. If we have good posture and are signaling appropriately, then demonstrating compassion puts us on the side of the escalated person, and that's incredibly valuable for de-escalation because, not sure if you've noticed, they're not having a great time. If we aren't signaling appropriately, then suddenly demonstrating compassion will come off as manipulative, and that's kind of the opposite of what we want. So, how do compassion? Even when we aren't feeling it. First of all, patience. De-escalation cannot be rushed, so letting people work through their situation at their own pace is critical to not escalating the situation further. It's okay to let people sit at a level of escalation until they're done. There's nothing wrong with that. We do want to redirect when someone escalates further to keep them from building up too much emotional momentum, but that also needs to be proportionate to the harm that their escalation might cause, which is less force than you think. Note, we could go through all of the different individual behaviors that indicate escalation and how they look for different emotions and all that, but that's not going to be useful for most people in everyday situations. The thing that we need to keep in mind is that escalation is the desire to change the situation. The more escalated a person is, the more they allow their behavior to affect others. So when we have someone who is venting, our only priority is to direct that venting productively. Listening will do that trick most of the time. But when the tone or target of the venting changes, then something mild like, let's work on this problem right now and we can tackle that one later, can help keep things on an even keel. When someone is pacing or otherwise dominating their space, that's a fairly high level of escalation, but if they don't focus on us when we enter that space, then we can let them continue with no interference from us. And if they do focus on us, then we can offer a change of circumstances to keep things directed productively. Like, do you mind if we sit down to talk for a minute? Or, take a walk with me. I'm listening, it just seems like you've got some energy to work out. If their behavior doesn't present an immediate threat to themselves or someone else, then we don't have to call it out or engage with it at all. We can and we might want to, but we don't have to be successful. It's different tools that may be appropriate depending on the nuances of your escalated situation. Second, remember that this might be you. You absolutely have been escalated over something trivial. You absolutely have used violence to move a situation to your favor. You absolutely have sought to control the actions of others to make your life better or safer or more stable. I know you have, and I have too. Be very careful of fundamental attribution error, which is an unavoidable cognitive bias where we ascribe the actions of others to their character and of us to our circumstances. They cut you off in traffic because they're an asshole. You cut someone else off in traffic because you're late for work. Sidestep this by asking yourself, what might make them think that this behavior is the best course of action? And really think about it. If your answer is because they're dumb, or because that's how children are, or something similar, then you're still in fundamental attribution error town. Redirect. The escalated person is you in a different time and in a different way, and they are as deserving of the patience and grace that you give yourself. Ask not for whom the bell tolls, friends. It tolls for thee. Remember that we all escalate. Every time you have to engage with another human being, you escalate. And you don't have to be best friends with your escalated person. You don't have to be able to go out for beers after this and reminisce about that time that they were an asshat. But you do have to treat them with as much compassion and dignity as you can muster. Be the person that Mr. Rogers knows you can be. Merry Christmas. I'm taking next week off, so I will see you on January 7th. Be smart. Stay safe. Bye.